event. So I started flying paramotors a couple months ago. And so I'm going to stop there for a few days. There's some vendors I want to meet that are going to be there at this event in Fredonia. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, you are.
Fredonia. And then I fly from there to back to civilization.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen some pictures out there on the beach, man. That has to be now flying out there above the ocean. That's got to be amazing.
It is. Flying paramotors is one of those things that, if more people did it, I think they'd realize how much fun it is. And I think a lot more people would do it if it just had more exposure.
Yeah. Is it kind of like one of those things where you do it and you're actually having to be present and you're in the moment and you actually can forget about a lot of other things and maybe even get some mindfulness exercises in there?
It is. It's one of those things. It's the closest. It's probably the closest that you can be to, I would say, like flying like a bird. Have you flown it all before? Like personally?
No, I've parachuted a couple times and
okay.
So similar, but when you're free falling from the sky, it's not quite as relaxing as probably sitting there and being able to take that moment. And when you're free falling, you're trying to maintain a certain status and flex certain muscles and use your hands kind of to guide you a little bit. I don't think it's quite the same as being able to just sit there and kind of glide like a bird. That'd be I think. Yeah.
The nice thing about paramotoring is you, like, I just take off the other day. I just took off from the beach, which was absolutely amazing. So yeah, and that's one of the things is it's so free. Like you can just pack it up in your car, drive somewhere, launch, and you're checking it out.
How portable is that motor?
I mean, for flying and transport, it's a little bit tricky. Like you have to ship it ahead. You have to get like a pretty big box, and shipping it ahead is maybe $150. But you can ship it ahead. And then when you get there, once you get it down, probably a half an hour and you're back and it's put all back together. There's some units that are really quick that are maybe like 10 or 15 minutes breakdown and you can put in a box and ship and you're good to go.
Nice.
Yeah.
Anything like that that's relaxing for the soul and able to, kind of get it away from everything and really get some mindful exercise in. And it's probably a real passive, you're not having to focus and maybe on, like mindful exercises. You often focus on breath, heartbeat, things like that. Where you're up there, it's just, you're in the moment and it probably comes a lot easier, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm not there yet. I still have a little bit of a pucker factor because I'm like right at 20 hours. So I still have a ways to go before I get my unconscious competence down.
I imagine once you get that incompetent conscious down, that pucker factor is one of those things that'll always be there. When I went through the Marine Corps, there was a school that we went through and it was doing ropes, a lot of, going off of cliffs and stuff, a lot of, whenever they belay and they go down the rope, I can't even think of the name of it.
Right. Yeah. Rappelling.
That's it. No matter how many times you do that, that hair always stands on the back of your neck, even if you relax. So
I think if you don't have that, you should be asking yourself, are you getting too complacent?
Yeah. Yeah. Or you just, are you just ready to let go? Is it one of those things where it happens?
That's right. Yeah. One of the two.
Well, it's great to see you again.
Yeah, likewise.
So, I wanted to dive into some of these topics that you were kind of, illustrating a little bit of compassion, a little bit of free will. And in my opinion, I think compassion is one of those things that people are definitely lacking today. There's a lot of interesting things going on. I listened to an interview the other day, and this gentleman was talking about certain vibrations that are present in all living things, animals, plants. This was kind of like a Bruce Lipton, but it wasn't Bruce Lipton, it was something else. And he mentioned that these vibrations are measurable. And over the last 50 years, they've increased tremendously. So in other words, all the life around us, the earth, the whales, ocean life to the horses out there. Everything today is feeling an excessive amount of stress. Has to probably do with how unnatural we are actually living. We're not really attached. We're not connecting. We're not having that human experience that we should be having. And ultimately, when that human experience is there, there's compassion and love. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a real good point. I think I think when we look at those kind of things, I think it all comes down to, that's a level of objectifiable or quantifiable rather forms of communication that I think is, I mean, it makes perfect sense. I mean, even just sound, talking is a vibration. I mean, really all it is a vibration of sound waves through that's stimulating the air, that then our body's able to pick up in certain frequencies and wavelengths that then we interpret as energy. And you think about just the energy from wavelengths through the air. Somebody can say something. You could have somebody, say, think of like your daughter saying "dad" for the first time, and what that energy wavelength does to your brain and the physiological response as a result of that. So yeah, I think energies and being connected and being in sync with that, I think there's a lot to be said for the validity of that and how that plays a role in how we communicate, how we connect, and and how we conversate. And I think it can also be noisy because of that. So I think the more we can be in tune with trying to tune in the right and tune out the wrong, I think it will get us closer to where we'll ultimately want to be.
What are some changes in compassion that you see going on currently with people?
I think for compassion, I think for me, and this is something that I know we didn't dive into last time, but I think, and so some people have some pretty strong feelings on it, so we certainly can dive into it. But I think, to me, look, really embracing the idea that we don't have free will. And I'm happy to explain why I feel that way and why I believe that way, to me lends itself to another level of compassion, because there's a phrase that I've used for a long time, and that is that everyone is doing the best they can with what they have at the moment. And I remember one time I was on a hike with some of my family members, and family's the best, right? Talk religion and politics and get into some good discussions. And we were on this hike, and we were talking about murder, and we were saying, it's horrible, and we talked about all the negatives of it. And at the same time, I said, well, that person, is doing the best they can with what they have in the moment, and it opened up an interesting conversation. And I still believe that today, that each and every one of us really is doing the best we can at a given moment, and I think if we can recognize that, then that lends itself to another level of compassion and patience and understanding. Not saying that somebody that murders shouldn't be, let's say, sequestered for protection of society, but rather we should ask ourselves, is our approach to dealing with this actually addressing the underlying cause? And I don't have the right answer for that, because I don't know. I would say this. I would say probably most of the time incarceration, the way we currently have it structured, I would say isn't the best way to get a change in behavior, if that's really what we're wanting. I think there's other ways to do it while also still protecting society. I'm not saying that people that murder or do heinous crimes shouldn't be sequestered from society for a certain amount of time, and that's up for interpretation. But I think there's a much better way, and I think most people would agree with that the prisons aren't set up right, and so forth. But it's looking at it from a state of compassion as opposed to retribution and retaliation, and rather how can we really fix this, and how can we prevent it from happening in the future if it's not a desirable behavior.
Yeah, and I fully agree with that. I think United States is number one in incarcerated people, and the methods we have for dealing with that and again, altering those undesirable behaviors is definitely not looked at right. And, we got to look at, there are a certain percentage of people with mental illness that don't have any compassion for others or even themselves. We call these people psychopaths and sociopaths, and they're definitely ones that should be dealt with. But more than ever, it's sometimes these people have emotional traumas deep down, and again, situations can vary. If someone attacks your family, if somebody breaks into your house, I would never really consider that murder. I'd consider that self-defense, especially if there is a life-threatening situation involved. Now, just to go out and have a disagreement with someone, and to have such a strong disagreement where a person reacts and ultimately maybe kills the other person, is a direct unattachment to one of the functions in our prefrontal lobe. I think whenever we are attached to this human part of our brain, and again, we're not sedated, we're not caffeinated, we're not on narcotics, we're not on antidepressants or many other of these chemicals that so many people are on today. I just read a study today of in Canada alone, the amount of antipsychotic medications has increased like 43% in the last 5 years, especially for children. And it's not because they're psychotic, it's because we are not addressing their emotional behavior correctly. So there's a whole nother field for that, dealing with the side effects of that alone. But again, if we're not dealing with those emotional factors and we're sedating people, we're either categorizing them as a medical problem or a behavioral problem, and we're putting people on drugs, we're getting them unattached from that. And then likely you can see some of the repercussions of that. And you can see that in the school shootings. Every one of those school shootings had some kind of chemical manifestation involved, but we don't hear about those things. People on the SSRIs, so on and so forth, and when they get off of those, there can be some pretty quite significant changes in brain chemistry where people will do things without even having the ability to understand.
Well, I think I think you're absolutely right, and I think I think even on that level, I look at it like the bell curve that we're all on, and I kind of look at it like lab values. Like you can have the maximum, the high range and the low range, and let's say if somebody is right here, and they're within the normal range, but let's say they're right at the edge. Well, does that mean that they're healthy? And you can have that range there. So when you look at people all along that bell curve and on that continuum, like you said, even from the people that are on, antipsychotics or antidepressants or whatever it is, that we're all in that continuum in there. And I think going back to one of your previous statements or questions about compassion, it's recognizing that we all are on that continuum and that we all can drift within that continuum at any given situation, pretty much at any time, given the right environment. And when you consider that we all are capable of pretty miraculous and pretty heinous acts if we're in the right or the wrong environment that elicits it. And I mean, obviously there's, so many psychologists and psychological studies that show how easy it is to change someone's behavior just by changing a few things. It's like getting in an elevator. Just by having people turn around and face the door, you can get so many people to come in and then turn around. So we know that you can elicit behavior. I mean, marketers know this very well. If on a checkout page, if you change the color of the buy now button from green to red or red to green, depending on your audience, that will have a statistical significance in terms of the number of people that buy a product. So we know that we're so governed by things that it really, I guess, starts to demystify the idea of free will. So when you go back to the fact that these people are doing the best that they can, it makes no sense to load them up with medications without looking at really what is the true underlying cause. I mean, that's a treatment, but it's not the best treatment. It's not fixing the problem. I mean, even just to your point, what you were saying, I think antidepressants are the third most prescribed medication in the U.S., only behind, I think, painkillers and cholesterol medications. So when you look at that, I mean, cholesterol medications and pain medications and then antidepressants. And I think suicide for men, I think I'd have to check this again, but I think it's either the 7th or the 10th leading cause of death.
Yeah, 7th. That's crazy. Yeah.
So, I mean, the 7th leading cause of death is by yourself. So we're clearly not grasping the mental aspect of this. And we need to get a handle on understanding why people are doing what they're doing, how the environment's shaping it, what our genetics, epigenetics play, and what can we do to try to prevent and try to turn that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, whenever we see the numbers of this, it's obvious we're part of a big social experiment, and it's pretty sad. So back to free will, you kind of mentioned that a little bit. Do you think people are free today?
Well, I think there's two things. I don't, in terms of free, I guess there's, just to maybe clarify that, I see freedom as being able to, walk out of your house and do what you want as long as you're not affecting other people. I see that as one freedom. And the other is the idea of free will is that whether you walk outside of your house and what you do has already been predetermined. So I see it in two realms. And just to make sure we're talking about the same thing, I see freedom. I think we do have a lot of freedoms. I do believe that they're in constant jeopardy if we don't continue to fight for our freedoms. And the outcome of that, I think, has already been predetermined. And yeah, I guess I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Do you believe that we have free will, or do you believe that we're self-governing?
I think we have freedoms in the areas that don't really count. Now, I think there are freedoms like we were just talking about, like you want to go fly, and that's something that you enjoy doing, and that's what you'd like to do. And we also have freedoms that, we can walk out of our house and we have this choice of, toxic food, or this many flavors of Baskin Robbins ice cream, or, pick your favorite booze and things like that. But I think the freedoms and the real areas that count are disappearing, quite frankly. The vaccination thing that just passed in Oregon, why don't we, if that's about health, why don't we address, getting rid of the foods that will cause diabetes, that causes amounts of inflammation, the chemicals, we're getting some ground, and you're starting to see, Roundup getting pulled off some shelves and things like that, which are, I think, good steps in the right direction. But as far as the freedoms that really count, those are kind of hanging on a thread some places. And I think that we are really exposed to a lot of mind control. And again, mind control is not the typical, person with drool coming out when they're kind of, arms stretched like a zombie.
Sure.
I think that it's a series of, and I got this from Jason Christoff. I'm a big follower of him, but I think he's absolutely right on mind control tactics, and the things used around us are just a series of punishments and rewards, and it can start in school. It starts in the elementary school when they start to teach these kids perhaps early lies that are all entangled, and the kids eventually start to get rewarded when they, answer correctly on a test or something, despite if it's true or not. And there's a difference between truth and there's a difference between propaganda. And
right.
Nowadays people have such a hard time determining what's what. But I think by putting children in the education system that's crossed in the European Union, in the Canadian areas, and certainly in the United States, we start to ingrain these mind control tactics in the children. So by the time they go through 18 years of school, they're no longer interested in truth. They're interested in what they have to do to get a certain reward or a certain punishment. Right. When you talk about things like vaccines, when you talk about things like, using 300 million pounds of Roundup a year, or you're using genetically modified foods, which are even, banned in Syria, it's really, are we really living free, or are we just under this perceived condition that everything's okay, and most people aren't able to question and put those two things together? It's kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think you bring up some good points. I think those things are certainly in jeopardy in terms of clean air, clean water, clean food. clear thoughts and clean thoughts. I think all of those things are in jeopardy. And I think that's one of the big things right now, especially in Oregon, which I believe it got shut down, the mandatory vaccines, but there's no saying that it won't come back. And yeah, I'd stand by my original statement, and that was that our freedoms are under constant jeopardy unless we are regularly protecting them and fighting for them. That there's no shortage of people that want to tell other people what to do or how they should live their life. And I think unless you're overtly affecting somebody else, then I think the idea of live and let live, holds so true. Now, and that's where it gets sticky, right? Because who's to say, if someone wants to smoke, that's fine, but then don't make me pay don't make me or somebody else pay for their health care. And then you could say, well, if somebody's smoking, well, you can also argue that that person is, that secondhand smoke is problematic. Well, and then there's the argument of, well, how far does that secondhand smoke go? And where does the burden of proof lie to show that the secondhand smoke is infringing on someone else's liberties, or even now thirdhand smoke? So the idea that where one person's influence stops and starts, that's where the line I think gets sticky. And that's where, from the vaccine issue, even just bringing that up, I think so many people are dancing around what the real topic is. And I think to try to distill it down to pro-vax or anti-vax, I think really completely misses the boat. And I think both sides of the argument, to me, lose ground and lose a foundational positioning when they try to argue about vaccines good or bad. I think that the real argument should be had on the front of does the government have the right to mandate medical procedures? And if so, what is the burden of proof, and who does it lie with? I think that's where the conversation should be had, because I'm not putting myself as a vaccine expert for how many different vaccines are out there. I couldn't sit and tell you even all of them, or what the pros and cons of all of them. So I'm not an expert in that. But what I would put myself out there as trying to recognize where the conversation should be had. For instance, I think if I was going to, let's say, a place in Africa where there was an Ebola virus outbreak, and I was going there to help provide aid, I probably would get a vaccine, if possible, before I went against Ebola. I don't know all about it. I'd still want to research it and so forth. But now, would I give my kids a measles vaccine and a lot of the other ones? No, absolutely not. But that's the difference. Is the individual should be able to make the decision, because it comes down to because the thing is, I don't think it's all good or all bad. And I think there's ways to make things better, and I think there's also ways to make things bad. So as soon as someone says pro-vax or anti-vax, they've just enlisted themselves in identity politics, and they've completely alienated the other side. All they've done is they've entrenched their views, and they've built a stronger wall against the other side, because no conversation is going to be won with that. And I think the real true conversation should be had at the level of where and what and when is a government mandated medical procedure acceptable. And I think the term should be defined as to that, because everything else really is window dressing, and it's dancing around the crux of the conversation. Because just like somebody can bring up as many anecdotal experiences of my friend or my daughter or myself had this allergic reaction and I had this reaction, then someone else can equally bring up and say, well, vaccines also saved my child or saved me from this, this, and this. And you get into this never winning battle. No one's ever going to win, because people are bringing up anecdotal experiences. They're bringing up research that can be argued one way or the other, as opposed to getting down to the fundamental question of what needs to start first. And the fundamental question is, when should a medical procedure that's mandated be allowed and acceptable in society? And what we should be doing is building our criteria for what that would be, if at all. And then we should ask ourselves, okay, so let's say, for instance, if you do agree that there's a time and place to have mandated government medical procedures, if you believe that is the case, then you should be very clear, crystal clear, on what the criteria are for what would land in that. Because if you just say, oh, it's for the better, if it's for the better good, like I've heard people, even doctors say, oh, well, I think it's better for society and it helps protect society. Well, that's one of 1,000 boxes that you should have to check before you say, yes, this is there. Because if that's the only argument, if the only argument is it's better for society, I could think of infinite things that should then be mandated. So that premise, that premise in that position of argument falls short very quickly. So that's one of probably 100 or if not 1,000 checks in the box that we should check. And so that should be one of them. Does it make society safer and healthier? Yes, that's one, but by no means is the only one. And I think that's the problem is so many people, they argue from one premise, and the premise is either superficial or it's skin deep and it doesn't have any teeth or any staying power. Because let's just say, oh, we should mandate vaccines because it's for the betterment and protection of and the health of society. Now, let's apply that same logic to just about any other thing, and you're immediately going to get a huge rash of pushback from the same people that would argue it's for the betterment of and the health and the safety of society. I mean, you could just easily say that for cars. You could make a case and say that cars are well, let's even just do this. Let's just say smoking cigarettes. Smoking cigarettes, we found, provide very little, if any, utility in society. Some people may say it improves their sense of well-being, it calms them, it scratches that addiction itch. So you could say that for some people it does provide a benefit, otherwise they obviously wouldn't keep doing it. But does smoking as a whole make society a better place? I don't believe it does, but I also don't believe that we should outlaw it just flat out. Just like I don't think we should outlaw alcohol, or I don't think we should outlaw cars. I don't think we should outlaw sodas. I don't think we should outlaw junk food, because I could go down the list of all the things that I believe that we could outlaw just based on the fact that it improves public health or public safety. But that's not our only criteria. And whenever someone says they're pro-vax or anti-vax, they've completely, I think what happens is they without knowing it, they lock themselves into a position that's so easily debunked both ways. Because I'm willing to bet that most people that would call themselves anti-vax, if there was an Ebola virus outbreak coming, or if there was an anthrax virus or an anthrax, or there was some infectious agent or some biological or bioterror event or something that was completely, let's say, man-made and nothing our bodies have ever experienced before, and there was a way that we could stop it. Otherwise, it was just killing people left and right. I'm willing to bet most people that would claim themselves to be anti-vaxxers would probably line up to get it. But that doesn't mean that they also have to throw in the towel and say that they're willing to get all the other vaccines that are out there, like a measles vaccine or a shingles vaccine or a chickenpox vaccine or an HPV vaccine or all these other things that I don't think it's not an all or one. And I think that's why you have to define it and then set your criteria.
Yeah, and some of those like measles and whatnot can be handled more appropriate with nutrition, where some of the other bizarre viruses that maybe we haven't come in contact with perhaps might be benefited from that. So there's
Absolutely
just me on both sides. And you mentioned we were talking about toxic air, toxic thoughts. I think that's a big problem with people today. Again, with this whole 5G thing going on too, that's again, something that, I had the mayor in here, a while back, and he brought out his cell phone and he said, whenever I have brought up the fact that these 5G towers are on schools, I get told by my upper authorities, don't even go there. So there is definitely something, he sees some kind of agenda at work on certain things that we aren't even allowed to question, you know? And that's whenever me as a former Marine, that's when me as a doctor trying to figure out why people aren't getting better, will start to question certain things.
Right.
But
well, I think as soon as the conversation stops, then it becomes a religion, and then you're stuck with faith as the answer, and that's no that's no place to have a logical discussion or have a healthy discourse about the health and well-being. I mean, you have to be able to have the conversation about 5G. Like, you have to legitimately. You have to be able to legitimately have a conversation, and people need to be able to present their sides and talk about it, as opposed to saying, hey, don't even go there. Like you have to be able to have a discussion about it, and it's unfortunate that it sounds like they're blocking that. And I think, even just going back just for a second, not to belabor it, but I think that's the problem with vaccines is people just they go from zero to boil in a matter of seconds, and they've completely. I mean, just like if you even try to touch the abortion issue and even just have a discussion about it, of like a genuine discussion, really hear somebody out. Most people can't even really share their side, even if you're genuinely just asking, like, hey, walk me through how you think about this. So many people will go from zero to boil, even just sharing their position, because they're so angry and worked up, and that's just them sharing their position. They'll get so worked up, and you're not even attacking them. You're just genuinely asking how that is. And you can only think that that's a sunburn from having so many discussions where people didn't hear each other. They just said, you're wrong, I'm right, here's why. And I think that when you talk about toxins of thoughts or poisoning our thoughts, I think that, I mean, just look at social media. I mean, it brings out the worst in people that you never would act in person the way people act on social media towards one another. And I've no doubt that you can probably look through my posts, and I'm sure I'm probably guilty of that at different times.
Yeah. Social media is more like anti-social media, because if people are so disconnected, and even for people to, learn and go through the process of evolving their thoughts. I don't think the evolutionary process that we've went through is capable. We're not even capable of keeping up with as fast as things have changed technologically. We can't even adapt to the stuff going on. And I think for real learning to take place, there's information that comes from external, and there's information that goes from internal out. And for people to really, I think a majority of it comes from the inside out. There's something inside that we like these gut feelings. And with that disconnection, if people are ill, if people are really stressed out, they're not able to think appropriately, and that can really influence the way they interpret the external environment. Aaron at Health News on Facebook shared a survey a while back, and it said, would you rather have autism, or would you rather have a measles vaccine, or I'm sorry, a measles, a rash for a week? And if you think back to the Brady Bunch, there was an episode of the Brady Bunch, and the kids were actually singing. The girl was excited because she had the measles, and they went to the doctor, and the doctor said, it's just a case of measles, they'll be fine. And they were at home, and they were actually singing, saying, well, if you got to get sick, you can't beat the measles. They were glad to be home from school.
Yeah.
And, but surprisingly in this survey that Aaron did, a majority of people would rather have autism than a rash for a week. And that's definitely showing a disconnect. That's definitely showing we're not able to think about things logically.
Yeah. I wonder who that audience was, and if they maybe were almost choosing autism almost to be almost a little tongue in cheek. If she was the one posting the poll, and if you had a group that was not in line with her views, I could see people almost posting that just to show that they were so robust in their beliefs that almost to rib her a little bit. I could potentially see, but yeah, it is a good point. I mean, especially when you look at I was talking with a researcher. Where was she from? I think she was from. I think she was Italian, And I was reading some of her research, and I messaged her, and she actually mailed me the hard copies. She had some research that showed that there's some evidence to suggest that people that have people that have measles, that it may offer a neuroprotective effect later in life, and that there's a potential association between measles when you're young, naturally acquired, and a reduced risk of Parkinson's. And saying that it may actually activate appropriately microglial cells or other neuroprotective type cells in the brain that can help ward off neurodegenerative issues. So, I mean, when you think about it, it's not that far fetched to kind of think about, like, walking barefoot hurts your feet because we're inside all the time. But if you walk barefoot all the time, and you built up those calluses, and then you were to go outside and step on something sharp, or walking through your house and you stub your toe, it's not gonna be as problematic as for the person that's built up the calluses versus the person that doesn't. So I think there's something to be said for building up that immunity, if you will, or strengthening the system that may, as when you're looking at a potential mechanism of action, you can see how that may, some of these issues may lead to benefits. And that's the other thing. Some of these infections may lead to more detrimental effects. When you look at some of the hepatitis and so forth. So to me, it's not a pro or anti-vax. And that's why, because I mean, I think there's some evidence to suggest that getting measles naturally acquired may actually have some long-term health benefits versus getting, for instance, like the flu vaccine, for instance, there's some evidence to suggest that it may increase your risk of future flu-like symptoms and future infections, and may actually weaken your immune system. I mean, along the same lines as the measles, but in terms of hepatitis, or like going back to Ebola, if I was going to get a vaccine for one of those, from what I know right now, I'd have to research it more, but there may be an argument to be made for a vaccine potentially against that. But again, you have to look at when's it done, at what age, what are the other ingredients? I mean, you still have to go through all those other questions, and you may still arrive at the fact, I'm going to take my risks. I'd rather not have the vaccine. But then it goes back to, when should a government be able to mandate a medical procedure? It's not mandate vaccines, it's mandate a medical procedure. Because that's really the crux of it. Because as soon as you do that, you're circumventing informed consent. You're superseding the doctor-patient relationship, and that's a very sacred relationship in our society and in our culture. And there's so many laws around a doctor-patient relationship. And now, if you're saying that a legislature, a politician, has the power to come in with no medical background, and that can come in and can supersede that relationship, there's a lot of questions that would need to be answered first to make that okay and to make that right, and on down the line. So, yeah, anytime I see people that say, "Oh, I'm pro-vax or anti-vax," and they're not really willing or able or genuinely discussing the crux of the conversation, you kind of you have to take pause and try to recircle and try to get back to that fundamental question. But it's so noisy and so crowded with all of these superficial arguments that are so easily either debunked, or you can make the same claim from either side, just replacing some of the facts, but the premise doesn't hold any water, and et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that is probably the biggest issue is we need to understand is, when is it okay to have government mandate that stuff, and that should be a more appropriate topic that people are looking at, rather than just kind of taking one side or the other. But again, we're fed a lot of propaganda. People are, again, unattached from this human side, so they're governed by fear.
Yeah.
By fear, they can make decisions that aren't, well thought out, thoroughly thought out. So there's a lot to be said between that, and me being a former Marine, God knows how many vaccines I've had,
Right.
So, but here's one thing is for sure. I spend, I've told this in some of my past lectures, I drive a Nissan Armada. I got a big family, and I have a Platinum Armada, and my supplements I take every month are about equivalent to my car payment. And a third of those are geared towards my immune system. I take my immune system very seriously. Vitamin C, or immune modulating herbs, keeping my gut health right, keeping my microbiome strong. All those are very important, because I don't doubt that there could be still some repercussions from that. And today, just, it's just kind of off the topic a little bit. I see a lot of veterans in big trouble. We're losing 25 a day now.
Sure.
And it's not that they're not subjected to certain experiments. I mean, that's just kind of a part of it. I know whenever I was in, there were the batch ahead of me, the group of men ahead of me were getting some kind of, I think, anthrax vaccine. Several people fell ill, and they pulled the plug on it, and that was right ahead of me. So that was quite frightening,
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Take that and extrapolate that. The government, the history is full of situations and instances where the government made bad decisions. And now, and then compound that with the idea that many medical procedures, even that are going on today, are already being debunked. And even medical procedures. Well, think of this: for frontal lobotomies, I think that was in the 50s. I forget his first name. I think his last name begins with an M, but his apprentice was Freeman, Dr. Freeman. So the previous gentleman, the previous doctor, he received, I believe, the Nobel Prize for frontal lobotomies, and because that was deemed the best way to treat people with schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, etc. So ask this: if somebody with schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, let's say that you could make the argument that those people are more prone to be a threat to society. And let's say that maybe people with those issues turn out to be, let's just say they turn out to be school shooters. And what we find is that if we go back to doing frontal lobotomies on people that exhibit a certain level of aggression, or that have a certain genetic code, or that have a certain makeup, does that mean that because it's for the betterment of the health of the protecting the society, that we should go back to doing frontal lobotomies? Well, in the 40s and 50s, we thought that was okay. Now, what if at that time the group of doctors got together with the legislators and said, hey, anybody that a teacher deems to be anxious, depressed, nervous, or unsettled in class, then we need to do a frontal lobotomy. And because given the medical data at the time, you could easily justify that. But now we look back on it and realize that that's barbaric. I mean, Freeman went on to do ice pick lobotomies, where you jam an ice pick up in the eye, right above the eye, and you go in there and you like kind of scramble the brain a little bit. Now, what if you can take that to, let's say, using today's technology? Let's say you could use pinpoint laser technology, and you could go in and you could do an ablative therapy and destroy just a micro portion in someone's brain. And let's say that reduced aggression by a measurable percentage. And then from there, you could say, well, statistically, this reduces domestic violence by X percentage, and it makes people more subdued, et cetera. Should we then mandate that procedure? Or let's say if you can go in and find the area in the brain that causes people to be addicted to alcohol, and we can show that it reduces drunk driver fatalities and injuries by X percentage. Should you mandate that anybody that drinks alcohol, before they get alcohol, they have to show their card showing that they had this ablative therapy, laser therapy in their brain? So these are the questions that we need to be asking if we're not truly laying a genuine foundation for why and how we're selecting our criteria in making decision-based criteria or criteria-based decision-making, and rather than just shooting from the hip. And that's the thing is just like frontal lobotomies got shown to be wrong, so many other healthcare procedures get shown wrong on the daily, because we know that science is an ever evolving. I mean, the whole point of science, one of the points of science, is to try to prove itself wrong with iterations. And so to make a mandate along the way, what if you catch one of those iterations, in a lull? I don't want to be that person. And so that's why I think we have to be very clear, like you, right? You were like on that wheel for that anthrax vaccine, and you just missed that rotation before it rolled and it made its fourth circle, and they said, nope, we got to pause this. So when you look at mandates, And as soon as you look at telling and forcing someone else what to do based on what I think is best for them, I mean, I just have such a problem with that.
Yeah, it needs to be very thoroughly examined. In my experience with people that have addictions, okay, I'm starting to dive into that a lot more with people. Is they always have some kind of pain they're suppressing, one way or another, and that was certainly the case with me, years ago. But what I always find is somebody has some kind of emotional pain that they're trying to escape, and that's where all this stuff is available to kind of suppress that pain, from cigarettes, right, to alcohol, to even pornography,
yeah,
various shopping. It might be a number of things, but essentially those things are there to almost act as a mild painkiller.
Yeah.
And I think one of the best ways for people, if they are get to the point where when you push pain down so much, it's only going to pop back up. And when they get down to the point of I want to figure this out, what they have to do is realize that they're essentially just running from their pain. They have to be with it, and that's the only way they're going to simply grow, including alcoholism, including people that are addicted to drugs, prostitution. It just kind of goes across the board. So,
well, I think that gets to the whole meaning question, because I think that goes to Viktor Frankl, man's search for meaning, surviving the concentration camps. And when he got out and he did his logotherapy, one of the things he'd find with people with addiction is that they didn't have a deeper meaning in their life, or something they were working on. And so what they were trying to do is find something to give themselves some type of stimulus or pleasure. So the idea is that, what he would ask is, he would phrase it, he would say, we shouldn't be asking why the addiction, we should be asking why the pain.
Yeah.
And the way that he would the way that he would get to that is he would start with a or I don't know if he'd start with it, but sometimes he'd cut right to it, a pretty bold question. He would just say, someone that's dealing with addiction, is he would say, so tell me, why haven't you committed suicide yet? And asking that is a very raw crux, question. And of course, you need to create the space for that. But asking that question gets to the heart of the problem instantly, because in order for someone to genuinely answer that, they're by default almost always going to answer, if they can genuinely answer it, is that they're going to come up with something that has some meaning in their life. Yeah. Because usually people that are dealing with addiction, especially drug or some of these other addictions that gosh, just take people to the depths of despair and just is absolutely horrible, that when you ask that question, you oftentimes see something boil up to the surface that you can start from. And I think helping people find that meaning, and helping craft their life around that, and then putting more things in their circle and in their basket to make that basket bigger and carry more weight and direct their attention towards that basket as opposed to the addiction basket, I think you have a much better chance of helping people win and come out successful on the other side.
Yeah, one thing that question does, and you're really hitting on it, is it almost forces them to focus on something positive.
Absolutely.
Despite the circumstance they're in. And then when you find that positive, you can start kind of working with it, and ultimately I think people have lost their purpose. A lot of times they're doing things they don't like. They're doing jobs that don't fulfill them. They're doing, and I'll say people are doing, sometimes they're doing something, that completely leaves them drained. It loses their spirit. And that's why at the end of the day, that's why you'll see people go through the work week, and by the time Friday comes around, they're just ready to party because they've just been so numbed up from doing something that doesn't match their potential. So, or even give them purpose. So,
well, I mean 70.7% of the U.S. population is either overweight or obese. I haven't met any obese people that love to be obese, that think, man, I love this and I want to be more obese. I'm sure you could find a few outliers if you really searched, but what I'm getting at is that yeah, the vast majority of us are doing things we know almost every day. You could probably ask somebody, did you do anything today that wasn't the healthiest for you? And could you have done better? Could you have had, one less French fry and one more bite of salad? Yeah. Could you not, almost all of us do things, myself included, that we know are not healthy for us. And if we get down that path if we do too many things that are unhealthy for us, it's typically an illustration that we're looking for a short-term pleasure, a short-term satisfaction, because we don't have a deeper, longer term meaning or perspective. So we're looking for that short term. And I mean, 70% of the population is overweight or obese. And we know that most of those people are doing things that they know on a daily basis. And again, myself included, even though I'm not overweight, I do things that are unhealthy, and I do them knowingly. So we know that even these like micro addictions to food or these other things, we know that we're all susceptible to it. So how do we create an environment to where we can win? Because the environment is so predictive of what our behavior is ultimately going to be in this. There's something else that you said that sparked something, but I'm missing it now. So I'll pause there. Maybe I'll think of it again.
Yeah, ultimately just finding purpose. And I think if the person can develop self-love, it's going to make them want to make better decisions. For instance, in our last interview, I think some of your tips were fantastic, and I've actually implemented those. I've even told a couple of my clients that, hey, replace the starch with an extra vegetable, on your plate. My wife and my daughter and I, now when we go to Sprouts, which is like a more healthy grocery store here, we try to name off the vegetables and this and that. So it's kind of a little game. And ultimately it comes down to we're present, we love each other. We want our daughter to be raised healthy. And I think that people that are sedated, I think people that are over caffeinated, sugar high, beverage high on these mind altering medications, it's nearly impossible for them to take that step and to love themselves. So when they're miserable and ultimately the more pleasure they seek, the less happiness they have. So what they're going to do is just get into this spiral of eating junk. And really, I think it comes down to they've got to figure out what's their underlying pain and start to develop some self-love. Yeah. Because when you can self-love yourself, you're going to take a little bit more steps in deciding what you eat and what you don't eat. And, I'm in that same boat. We all are. It's just depends on how much you love yourself and how much you're willing to enjoy that moment.
Right.
I'm willing to bet that Monday through Friday, you eat pretty good. You eat a lot of vegetables, eat a lot of good fats. On vacation with your family, that's when you probably are saying, hey, you know what? I'll have a piece of this cake or whatever else. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I don't know if it'd be the cake, but yeah, it definitely deviates.
Or you'll be like, I will have that coffee or whatever else it might be that I normally wouldn't drink.
Sure.
But again, habitual comes down to you love yourself, and even seeing the chronic level of illness that you do with the memory problems, with the dementia, with the Alzheimer's, all that, and you look at their lifestyle, it's like, wow,
right.
That makes me want to definitely avoid, eating that stuff on a regular basis.
Well, I think the crux of what you just said, I think is getting really good at asking why. And I think maybe we touched on this in the last interview is really asking, really getting good at asking why and being honest with the answers to yourself, even if not to somebody else, to yourself. I mean, I think if you can do it with someone else, I think that's great, but it's like, so why am I eating this cake? So, okay, well, because I want to feel some pleasure right now, and I feel like I deserved it. Well, why do I feel that? Well, because I had a hard day at work. Why do you feel that? Well, because, I woke up tired and I was frustrated, and so I was short with my boss. I was short with my customers today. Well, why is that? Well, because I'm not sleeping very well. Why aren't you sleeping well? Well, because, and you can just keep going down. And if you ask that enough times, you'll get to some genuine solution, causation oriented based steps that you can do that if corrected will have a major impact in your life, even though it's just, like we talk about, 1 or 2 degrees flying across the US, if you take off from San Francisco, 1 or 2 degrees is going to mean, are you going to end up in New York or a completely different state? So it's the small changes lead to huge differences down the road.
And I think ultimately why, asking that why question, I think there's probably exceptions, but I think the universal answer to that is they want to take a temporary escape from themselves. They don't want to be themselves temporarily. And then the question comes, well, why do you not want to be yourself? And again, it comes down to maybe an emotional trauma, some kind of deep underlying pain, and they're just letting the rough day, they're letting the boss that overworked them, the kids that are screaming, whatever else it might be. That's kind of an excuse in trying to escape from being who they are. And then you got to say, well, why do you, again, build the person up? You're a beautiful person. Why would you not want to be yourself temporarily? And even Keith Richards had this real famous line. Of course, the Rolling Stone guitarist who had a major heroin addiction for a while. This line has stuck with me for a while. He says, all the contortions that we put ourselves through just not to be ourselves for a few hours. And I think that's pretty huge on a lot of the why people do the things they do, why they're ultimately trying to escape.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I think that's, I think a lot of us, we twist ourselves in all kinds of positions, trying to be something that we're not. And I think if we stop and really ask ourselves why we're doing something or why we're not doing something, I think we can get to the crux of where we really need to be focusing and what we need to be, and the true solution.
And when we get to that point, when we get to that solution of the ultimate why, I think that's where self-growth is going to take place. Otherwise,
absolutely,
as men, we need to be evolving all the time. And I'm sure you've seen this in your clinic. I certainly do in mine, with these almost adolescent growth patterns that people have, where they spiral. It's not one thing, it's another. It's not one thing, it's another. And they're ultimately not getting down to that root and ultimately not able to grow. And
right.
Many factors for that. Family, perhaps a toxic relationship, many things for that, but it'll ultimately stun a person from growing and perhaps getting to that life of purpose that ultimately that we should all be kind of thriving for.
Yeah. I think that's very well said. I think we all do. I think we all, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of like rings on a tree. We all throw out new rings as we grow. And ideally, when you throw out a new ring and you grow, ideally you don't necessarily contract or go back, although we sometimes do. So maybe that's not the best example, but yeah, I'd like to think that as we grow and we kind of get those, we stretch ourselves, then we have that new level, then we have that new level of confidence and courage to ask ourselves why, and to go deeper with our actions in terms of really discovering is what we're doing serving us on whatever level, whether it's personal, whether it's relationships, whether it's business, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and to grow, I would think, especially looking at a tree, it almost takes a little bit of vulnerability. And as people have deep underlying pains, sometimes they don't want to be vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, it takes courage. It's like one of my coaches, Dan Sullivan, talks about in Toronto. Dan Sullivan with Strategic Coach. He talks about a lot of people look for courage, or I'm sorry, a lot of people are looking for confidence, but what they really need is courage. And so I put my own spin on that, and I said, that you don't get the luxury of confidence until you've paid the price of courage. But once you pay the price of courage, let's just say jumping off that diving board, once you've jumped off that high dive and you've paid the price of courage, then you're confident that you can do it again and again. But there has to be that courage and that first step. But the thing is once you have that first step and you have that courage and you jump off the first time, then you have that confidence that you'll most likely always have. And then from there, now you're looking at what's the next height? What's the next thing that I want to do? Yep. And that courage, the thing is that courage is you can compound it.
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize that, because so many people will stay small, and they don't really have the courage to live outside their comfort zone, because I think that's where, it's like the phrase, right? Life happens outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And if you're outside your comfort zone and you're exhibiting courage, and you do something new or novel, and you don't completely crash and burn, or if you do crash and burn and you live to tell a tale, you're going to have more confidence regardless afterwards, because you've been through it once. And I think that's the thing, is that you see people that kind of stay stuck and they never really exhibit the courage, and they think, oh my gosh, and they look at somebody else who has stacked their courage. They've jumped off that first high dive, and they said, you know what, I'm going to jump off this next high dive, and you know what, I'm going to do a double backflip off that high dive, and you know what, I'm going to do a triple, quadruple, and they're not afraid to belly flop a couple times, and they keep going higher. Well, what happens is the person that stays here that never grows, and then the other person that now is way up here, and they're doing backflips, somersaults, twists, all the other stuff, to this person down here, it looks impossible, because they didn't realize that it was done with incremental steps of courage. And once you get up to a certain level, you almost make the extraordinary look ordinary, because you paid the price of courage so much that you have so much confidence that those people become oftentimes our idols and our inspirations and our motivation to drive more. So if you're I'd say if people are listening to this and they're wondering, gosh, why don't I have X, Y, Z in my life? I'd ask yourself, number one, I'd go through the process of asking yourself why 7 times and really delve deep, and then ask yourself, what do I need to be courageous for in doing, and that I'm not doing? Because there's probably an area in their life that they're looking for confidence, but what they really need to be looking for and exhibiting is courage.
Yeah, and again, that takes a little bit of vulnerability, and you got to be almost willing to fail. You have to allow yourself to fail, because nobody jumps off a high dive and does a backflip the first time, unless they're just something extraordinary. But
yeah,
be willing to fail, and to fail less, and to understand that with failure comes new growth. A tree doesn't grow when it's hard and stagnant on the outside. It only grows when it's green and vulnerable.
Yep, that's a real good point.
Same with anything else in life, like a crustacean animal. It can't grow in a hard shell. It has to expose itself to vulnerability in order to get a harder shell. And so in order for us to have our own personal growth, we need to be grounded. We need to be honest with ourselves and determine, what is keeping me from this? Is it maybe I'm trying to escape being who I am, or something else?
Yeah. I think taking the time to reflect, I think is probably one of the most powerful things that we can do. I think, taking time for meditation, clearing the mind, trying to turn off thoughts, because all day long we have this constant stream of chatter in our brain. And the only difference between somebody that's normal and what we term crazy is basically somebody that says the things that's in their brain. We all have this chatter. It's just that for some reason the defining line is whether you speak it out or not. So we all have this chatter. So we're all borderline crazy, is what I'm getting at. So take some time to inject some sanity. And I think a way to do that is to try to gain control of your thoughts and of the monkey mind. I think doing meditation, asking yourself why, creating space and time to think about your thinking. I think all of those tools and those types of habits and approaches are going to be paramount to really helping us become bigger, better versions of ourselves, and therefore each other, become calm, peaceful, more centered, be able to have a discussion without going zero to boil, and ultimately be able to make better decisions.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when people go from zero to boil, it's not only a past maybe experience they've had with it, but I think it's also a sign that they are too much in that fight or flight. And again, in order to have this self-growth, in order to get this mindfulness, I think you have to have a clean mind. You have to have a clean mind. You can't do it, if you're intoxicating yourself and everything else. Otherwise, you're just kind of run around in circles. So,
yeah, good point.
This has been a great pleasure, Thaddeus Gala. I really appreciate your time today.
Likewise.
It's always great going down these rabbit holes with you, man.
Likewise. I always love our interactions. I love talking. Hopefully some people get something out of this. I know I always do. So thank you for making the time and creating the space.
My pleasure. When you're in Kansas, man, maybe look me up. Maybe I'd love to meet up with you. All right.
Sounds good.
All right, brother. You be safe out there.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.